What is going on, Hive Warriors? It's your boy Edward V, and today I'm going to take intermittent fasting and put it up against prolonged fasting. I'm going to talk about the pros of both of them and then talk about what each of them have as an advantage over the other. This is going to be a non-biased scientific take on both intermittent fasting and prolonged fasting. Stay tuned. Right into it, and let's start talking about intermittent fasting. What does intermittent fasting have? There have been multiple studies done on mice and done on humans that show a significant advantage for those who do intermittent fasting in terms of targeting fat burning, being very focused in burning fat because you are lowering your insulin to a baseline level, and when your insulin lowers, that is when your body can actually be more catabolic and attack specifically the body fat, as insulin protects your body fat. Insulin is actually used to push and move glucose through your body and then eventually store the excess glucose as body fat. But keep in mind, both intermittent fasting and prolonged fasting both do this. Now, the pros of intermittent fasting is that you can actually adopt intermittent fasting as a lifestyle. There have been recent studies that show that even protocols like the 16-8 method have a very low dropout rate. People can adopt this as a lifestyle. So intermittently throughout the day, you'll be consistently dropping your insulin down to baseline. And the longer you hold your insulin down at baseline, the longer you'll be burning body fat. Intermittent fasting allows you to be much more social, considering the fact that you can adopt and adjust your timing window to fit your social life or to fit in perfectly with just your general lifestyle. There are so many different protocols that you can adopt within the intermittent fasting umbrella, such as the warrior diet, which is 20 hours of fasting, 4 hours of eating; the OMAD diet, which can be 23 hours of fasting and 1 hour of eating; the 16-8 method, or the lean gains method, which is basically 16 hours of fasting, 8 hours of eating. And there's a bunch of other modifications to the intermittent fasting protocol. Intermittent fasting also taps into some biological health markers as well. It does increase your HGH, which allows to protect muscles during this short fasting period. It also elevates a certain level of autophagy, which is cell regeneration and cell breakdown. And these things help with things like inflammation, combating things like cancer. So that is very unique to fasting, and intermittent fasting has a certain level of that autophagy. But in a nutshell, the advantages that intermittent fasting carry is the adherence to the protocol being much easier, since you can be much more flexible with being able to eat every single day, and the safety of intermittent fasting, considering that intermittent fasting doesn't put you in a malnutritious state. You're actually still within the range where your body can work off of a lot of nutrients that you've already eaten previously in your feeding window. But now let's move on to prolonged fasting. What does prolonged fasting have that intermittent fasting doesn't? Well, for one, you are lowering your insulin for a long period of time. That long period of time keeps your insulin at baseline, as you are not consuming any glucose at all during that prolonged fasting period. What's considered a prolonged fasting period? Anything above 48 hours up until about 120 hours is the range of prolonged fasting. But there are people that go past that 120-hour mark. And keep in mind that I do not recommend anyone go on any prolonged fasting protocol without any medical supervision. Okay, but now let's look at the unique health factors of prolonged fasting. What does prolonged fasting bring to the table? With prolonged fasting, you can replace glucose as the primary source of energy in the central nervous system, essentially going into ketosis. There is, however, a misconception when it comes to ketosis. Although intermittent fasting, depending on the specific foods that you're eating, may not put you into a ketogenic state, you're still burning body fat as fuel when your insulin goes down to baseline. And you can bring your insulin down to baseline with intermittent fasting. What being in a ketogenic state does for you is that your body has effectively switched to using ketones due to the prolonged state in which you lack consuming glucose. So your body repositions itself due to its situation, thus you start to use ketones as your primary source of fuel. But understand that you don't have to be in ketosis to burn body fat. Studies have shown that in a prolonged fast, your insulin level falls and your T3 levels rise in your glucagon. And glucagon is basically a hormone found in your pancreas pancreas that promotes glycogen to glucose in the liver. So prolonged fasting makes you effective at pushing all of this glycogen throughout your body. Your IGF-1 levels and your pKa activity start changing in your body as well biologically based on the fact that you haven't eaten for such a long time. And IGF-1 is your insulin-like growth factor, which affects things like building muscle and aging. And of course, you're heightening your autophagy when you are in a prolonged fasting state. And these changes are happening in your hematopoietic stem cells. These stem cells can be found in the blood or bone marrow, and they're immature cells that can actually transform or turn into red blood cells or white blood cells. Both production of red and white blood cells are important for your body. So in terms of the biological transitioning within the biomarkers of your body, prolonged fasting has an advantage over intermittent fasting. In terms of consistently burning fat, prolonged fasting can do that as well. However, the danger factor also lies in prolonged fasting. Not only is it very difficult to be consistent with a prolonged fasting protocol, it also puts you at risk, things that you don't really have to worry about within an intermittent fasting protocol. And yes, your body would feed off of your body fat, but that is not the only thing that you have to worry about when you are not eating. It is not simply energy consumption. There are also malnutrition factors that you have to take into account. Negative side effects that can happen from a prolonged fasting protocol are as follows: gout, urate nephrolithiasis, postural hypotension, as well as cardiac arrhythmias. Gout is basically a condition that can happen within your body where there is an abnormal buildup of uric acid. They're actually like little crystals within your bloodstream that can actually cause intense pain, and that intense pain can be very sudden. You can be sitting or laying and then your feet go into an intense pain. Some have said that it feels like your feet are actually on fire. Urate nephrolithosis is the development of uric acid in the kidneys, essentially giving you a uric acid kidney stone, which can be very, very painful as well. Postural hypotension is basically when you are laying down and you get up and your blood pressure dramatically falls. This can cause you to faint and sustain massive injury from a fall. And cardiac arrhythmia is basically an irregular heartbeat, and the irregular heartbeat comes from the malnutrition of not eating. And this can be either sped up irregular or slowed down irregular heartbeat, and this can cause death. So it isn't as simple as just consuming energy. Yes, prolonged fasting is very potent, considering the fact that it reduces your insulin for a long period of time. But intermittent fasting is very practical and easy to do and stays within the safe range as opposed to prolonged fasting. So there you have it, guys. That is both the differences, the pros and the cons of both intermittent fasting and prolonged fasting. I hope this video was very informative for you. And of course, I want to thank my patrons from my Patreon, and I'm going to put their names right up here.